Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting of the Fargo School Board to order. Welcome. Approval of agenda.
I move approval of the
Mike,
agenda.
please.
I move approval of the agenda as prepared.
President Goldberg, we have a HR addendum as well.
Oh, yes. And
I'd like to modify my motion. I move to approve the agenda as prepared with the addition of the HR addendum.
thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Thank you. Agenda passed. Correspondence. I have two pieces. Assuming we have all been invited via two of the Carl Ben Eielson 8th graders to their talent evening on Friday at 7, and I'll pass that around for everyone to see. And also, I was copied today on an exciting letter from Neil Howe, who's the coordinator of the North Dakota Studies Program. One of our North High history teachers, Mr. Colin Kloster, has been named the North Dakota History Teacher of the Year. So that's really exciting for us. So I'll pass the letter around for you guys to see. And then, Dr. Schatz, do you have anything?
I have no correspondence tonight.
Anyone else with correspondence to share? Okay, thank you. Recognition of the audience. Tonight we have two people who have signed up. So it is my obligation to read a few instructions for you. So at this time, the board will hear comments from the public. We ask that each speaker who has signed up to address the board state their name and address for the record. We would also ask that speakers refrain from using this forum to criticize or complain about a specific employee by name. The board is interested in your comments and will listen carefully, but is not obligated to respond or to debate issues in this forum. Should you desire a written response to a specific question, you may request it. This evening, each speaker will be allotted a maximum of 4 minutes. And first, we have Eric Christensen.
Hello, my name is Eric Christensen. I live at 906 University Drive South. I would like to speak about the boundary adjustments. I have two children at Clara Barton Hawthorne, and one thing I found concerning, I understand we need to make adjustments, and that's fine, but I'm concerned with the splitting of the Jefferson School and the Clara Barton Hawthorne School as the kids go to middle school. At Clara Barton Hawthorne, we work very hard to foster a sense of community, and we're really quite a tight-knit family. And particularly when going to middle school, I mean, that's a very difficult time for kids anyway. And to have half your friends going to one middle school and you be going to a different middle school, that's a really difficult situation to be in as a middle school child. So I guess I would just ask that part of the proposal be examined a little more closely and maybe look at a comparison of keeping all of the Jefferson School students and all of the Clara Barton Hawthorne students together and moving them to one or the other middle school, but as the whole elementary, not splitting it. Thank you.
Thank you. And our second speaker is Ellen Schaefer.
Oh, there we go. Ellen Schaefer, 215 8th Street South, Fargo. Clara Barton Hawthorne, PTA president, very proud of it. I don't know why I did the go-bys, and it's just a habit. Don't really have anything formally written because I understand the job you have to do. And we knew this was coming. You have to move boundaries. Fargo's moved south. We understand where everything's going. But after today's paper came out, of course, I heard from several people saying, how can they split our neighborhood in half? Because we don't see ourselves, even though we might have two buildings, we don't see us as two separate groups. We are one big group, K through 5. one big family. And so when they saw that we might have to take each other and divvy up and kind of go about our lives separately but together, it didn't really sit well with a lot of our parents. So in looking at the drawings, I know that we're a long skinny city, but does our lines have to be completely horizontal? Can we look at some verticals? Can we look at maybe redefining some things that do keep kids together? Because I understand Jefferson isn't a lot different than what we are. It is all about community. They're very tight. They worked very hard and to keep their school open to get the new school that they've got now too. So as you look to make these tough decisions, just realize that you're dealing with a lot of human emotion, as you've heard from us in the past. And we'd like you to consider just knowing that as a group, we'd like to remain as one solid community school. Clare Barton Hawthorne is a neighborhood school, and our kids would like to stay together as a neighborhood. Thanks.
Thank you. We're now at staff reports. We have Lynette here on behalf of the FEA, on behalf of David.
Sure. I'm Lynette Chrisman. I'm a counselor at Ben Franklin Middle School. And on behalf of our Education Association, a couple things Dave wanted me to report. We had a great Teacher Appreciation Week, lots of goodies and goodies and goodies in our schools, and signs and thank yous from students and parents as well. And right now, our Executive Board Subcommittee is interviewing for the candidates for school board. They've done some Monday night, and they'll do some more interviewing next Monday. And then as a group, our FEA is going to the Red Hawks June 10th. So we've been trying to get out tickets to all the members that want to go. And then, of course, just wrapping up the year. We've had a great year. As an educator, looking forward to filling our cup when the end is near and hopefully better weather to do that. So that's where we're at.
Well, thank you. I hope you celebrate the election and remind all your members to vote on June 10th prior to going to the Red Hawks game. Thank you. AP 7110, pardon me, donations and gifts to schools. Dr. Schatz.
Thank you. As was noted earlier, the policy AP 7110, donations and gifts to schools, what we did was, after a suggestion from Board Member Johnson to take a look at our policy, to look at updates regarding donations or gifts that would be given to the schools, we did that, and we added some things and readjusted a few things. So what we're doing tonight is just making you aware of those adjustments. There's no action needed on it. But if you look at the new policy, you'll see that the first part, the to be accepted, a gift must satisfy the following criteria. Those were added over what we had before, and then a few adjustments to the policy, to the paragraph below. So just wanted you to know that we did follow up and update that policy. If there's any questions, I'd answer.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Schatz. Long-range facility plan update, boundary adjustments. Dr. Gross, Dr. Schatz, okay, you're both on this, you can fight it out.
I'm going to let Bob do most of that. Well, thank you. As you know, tonight we are bringing to you the first draft, first look at arranging our boundary lines. As you know, with the long-range facility plan, this was part of the process. We're building Ed Clapp Elementary School. We need to take a look at the elementary boundaries. And at the same time, it was also noted in the long-range plan that we need to take a look at those secondary boundaries too. And so I'm going to have Dr. Gross go through a presentation, and then from what I understand, then we'll ensue with a conversation by board members led by you, Dinah. Thank you.
Well, this evening what I'd like to do is I'd like to share with you 3 boundary adjustment proposals, one at the elementary level, one for the middle school, and one for the high school. As we go through these proposals, what I'd like to draw your attention to is it's really a first draft or a first reading as we look at this together. Our recommendation from the administration, though, is that there would be adjustments in August of 2015 to address the needs across the system. As we look at the proposals, and I share them with you, just wanted to make note that we certainly spent a tremendous amount of time looking at multiple opportunities, a variety of possible alignments, and what we think that, as we are presenting you tonight, is one of the best fits that we could find at this time that would meet the academic needs of our students and our families. As we think about boundary adjustments, the Long Range Facility Plan Task Force that met this year created a final report, and in that final report on page 13, they said this, that certainly as a district, we'll need to look at evaluating our boundaries for middle schools and high schools, balancing the enrollment decreases at Ben and North, and the enrollment increases at Discovery and Davies, and the true feeder system of our elementary schools to middle schools do create some unique challenges, and that we would need to take a look at these boundary adjustments the fall of 2015. So those are in line with the recommendations that we are making to you tonight. When we looked at the boundary adjustments, we looked at the guiding principles that were in the long-range facility plan document, and just to very quickly readdress them, what we looked at is, one, to provide that quality education for all students, providing that equitable space and resources to the students and staff in our district, striving for that equitable number of students in each of our classrooms, and striving to balance the socioeconomic mix in our buildings, especially at the secondary level when we set those attendance areas. We wanted to make sure that we were setting the boundaries to best utilize tax dollars that are available to us. As we looked at the different proposals, we certainly thought about transportation and the cost of transportation that would be ensued by any of the different proposals, and that we wanted to certainly anticipate growth and change in our community by working with different agencies across the city. And the plans that I will share with you tonight do provide for future growth in some of our buildings that we anticipate will need that space. Certainly recognize that this is a continual process, and boundaries will need to change many times, probably in my academic career or my career, because our community is growing. And this is just a natural process that our district will need to go through. When we built the boundaries or the proposals that we're going to share with you tonight, we tried to use natural boundaries whenever possible, major thoroughfares and other natural boundaries to set those parameters. We wanted to promote the attendance in a neighborhood school, especially at the elementary level, so that students had that sense of community. And that we wanted to look at the safe routes that students could use as they traveled to their school and back again. We made a few assumptions as we put together or built the proposals. And that first assumption was that we took all students in the district using a piece of software, and for the proposal, sent them all back to their home school. We have many students in our community who are on petitions where they have asked to go to a school outside of their attendance area. To build the proposals, we have the software move them back to their home school so that we could see truly how many students there were in each of the different neighborhoods that would build the different proposals. That would mean that once boundary adjustments were approved by the board, all students on petitions would be asked to return to their home school for the 15-16 school year, but there certainly would be an opportunity to submit a new petition to ask to go to a school outside of their boundary area, and that would just be processed as part of our normal petition cycle or process, and we would do that for that 15-16 school year. As we look at the elementary, we're trying to do a few specific things. The first is we wanted to set the new boundary attendance areas for our new elementary school, Ed Clapp Elementary School. We wanted to reduce the number of students at two of our buildings, Lewis and Clark and Lincoln Elementary, because as I get through this presentation, you'll see that they are near their capacity at this time and wanting to provide some additional space in those buildings. And we wanted to provide for that future growth at Kennedy Elementary, where we know much growth will happen in the immediate future. At the secondary level, we tried very hard to accommodate Fargo's growth pattern in population by shifting the boundary lines to create 3 similar-sized middle schools and 3 similar-sized comprehensive high schools. And the data I will show you in a little bit will show that. The alignment that this will cause at the secondary level will allow for growth at Discovery and at Davies, and should meet the academic needs and the offerings of our students at the middle schools and at our high schools. The proposals that we're going to share with you tonight change the feeder system the way it is currently, meaning that not all elementary students in one elementary school would go to the same middle school. And in fact, in the proposals I will share with you tonight, Jefferson and Clara Barton Hawthorne elementaries would have students attend 2 different middle schools. The timeline for the implementation, our recommendation would be that we would begin with elementary and middle school age students August of 2015, and that we would begin with freshmen at the high school level that same year, and then phase in the model over the next 4 years as students progress through that high school. The reason for this is to ensure that all students would have the opportunity and maintain their eligibility for participation in extracurricular activities that would be monitored by the North Dakota High School Activities Association. The other assumption that we made through this process, though, is any new student who would move into the district after that August of 2015 would certainly attend the school according to the new boundaries. And with that, I'd like to share with you the different proposals. The first one looks at the elementary. You have in your packet a document in landscape form, and those will be the same maps that I'm going to share with you. You also have at your desk a packet of Excel spreadsheets, and I will refer to that data as well as we go through this presentation. So at the elementary level, this is our current set of boundaries. On the map, you will see that each of our buildings has been plotted and is indicated on the map, and then the catchment area or attendance areas are shaded in a different color. As we look at this set of boundaries, and then we apply that one parameter of sending all students back to their home school, this is the type of data or demographic information that would be for those students. So now I'm referring to that data packet. On that first page, what you will see is over on the left-hand side of that chart would be our elementary buildings in alphabetical order. Across the top, you will see the number of students who are in that catchment area, the number of students on free and reduced lunch, in special education, or English as a second language, or our ELL students. And in particular, what I'd like to draw your attention to is Kennedy Elementary. You could see if we send all students back to their home school and we do not have Kennedy at Eagles running as an entity, Kennedy would have about 780 students. The next piece I'd like to draw your attention to is Lewis and Clark Elementary. You would see they would have approximately 540 students. And then Lincoln, close to about 540 students as well.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes?
Well, all I was going to say is, Bob, is there any place where it shows us the effect of this without adding in the return to the homeschool kids? Because I would think that would make somewhat of a difference, wouldn't it?
When we created the different proposals, we didn't know if the same pattern of people petitioning from one school to the other would be the same today as it would be in 3 years or 4 years. For that reason, we sent in the model all students back to their home school, but we would certainly allow for that petition process to take place.
Just to follow up on that, when a parent and a student petition in the year 2012 to move to one school or another, is that petition good for subsequent years, or they must repetition each year?
At the elementary level, where space is sometimes more of a concern, that petition is looked at each year at the secondary level. Once a student petitions into, let's say, the middle school, they are there until the end of that middle school career, or once they petition in the high school to the end of that career.
Thank you. I just had a question about the Eagles. We have 113 students there, but 95% of them have special needs? Or is that old data?
As I look at the line for the Early Childhood Center, the reason there is a slight difference between the total number of students and the number with special needs is we do have some students from outside of our district. And the data on the students in this chart is a pull from our student information system. So all of their information is there. The few students who come from outside the district through open enrollment or some other means, their demographic information is not there. That's why there is a difference between the 113 students and the 108 in that next column.
But I think her point is, we have 95% of those kids with special needs.
Don't we have Kennedy kids over there now?
Well, this is
The
the Early
early-
Childhood Center at
Yes.
Agassiz.
Oh, I
the
apologize.
Eagles.
I, for some reason, thought that we were
No.
included, so that's included in the Kennedy. The kids who are at Eagles now are, okay,
At the
sorry.
Kennedy, yes.
Okay. Gotcha. Rick?
Say not to throw you off here, but when would you like specific questions on certain of the changes? I mean, 'cause you haven't got to the change, but I've been kind of jumping ahead of you here.
Let's let him do the whole presentation.
Well, I'm not, I don't think the whole presentation, Dinah, because then we're gonna lose, then we're gonna go into secondary, and then we're gonna
Okay.
high school,
Well, if you
and
have an
so-
elementary question, when
Yep.
he's finished the
That's what I
elementary,
have. Perfect. That's what I
let's
was
do it that
asking
way then. Okay, finish the elementary and then we'll get elementary questions.
Wonderful. So with that information in mind, again, here were the three tasks that we were hoping to accomplish as we created the proposal. Based on that, here would be our suggestion for a new set of boundaries. Just for my own sense, because I don't have them side by side, I've superimposed on the screen in front of you existing boundaries, so you can see the impact that the new boundaries would have on the existing elementary school boundaries. There are three major changes to existing boundaries on this proposal. The first one would be the creation of the boundary area for Ed Clapp School. That would use 17th Avenue South as the northern boundary, 25th Street as the eastern boundary, 32nd Avenue as the southern boundary, and then I-29 as that western boundary. And that would be the catchment area for that school.
So, Dinah, my question relates specific to that, if I can ask. So, with the change for Ed Clapp boundaries, we've got a couple of different things going on there. We've got the areas right south of I-94, which is currently going to Lewis and Clark, and we've got the Prairiewood area, which is currently going to Lewis and Clark. How many students would be north of I-94 catchment area for Ed Clapp? Approximately, you know.
I will need just a minute or
Okay,
two to
that's fine.
find that
You
data.
can spend a break or
Yep.
something, you can figure that out. And the reason I asked, Bob, is because we're looking at, you know, pulling kids south or north of I-94, across I-94. And we're also picking up a fair amount of catchment area on the north side of Bluemont. I just kind of get some idea what the split is between the students north of I-94 and then the south of I-94 piece.
I can certainly find that for you. As we looked at the different scenarios or the different possibilities, a little bit further into the presentation, I'm going to show you the impact that this would have by grade level at the facility, and that was critical that we look at that as well. And I have that data as we move forward. The second change or major change that we would have from existing to this proposal would be in this area, basically to the east of University Drive, south of 35th Avenue to just slightly north of 48th Avenue, shifting that attendance area from Lincoln to Centennial. And then finally, the last shift would be on the west side of I-29, on the southern part of our boundaries, is basically use I-29 as the dividing line or the boundary between Kennedy and the other buildings. So everything to the west of 29 would become the Kennedy catchment area. What that does is create this type of demographic information for the students in those buildings. That would be if this year's students were moved to those locations based on those boundaries. What I'd like to first do is draw your attention to the new school, which would be Ed Clapp Elementary. It would have approximately 443 students. Its capacity is about 550 students. It's being designed and built as a 4-section building. Kennedy would have a population of about 490 students. You can see that its current area would provide 780 students, and its capacity is close to 750, 748. So if all of those students were in that location and we didn't use Kennedy at Eagles, it certainly would be over capacity. This model provides for future growth in that community. At Lewis and Clark, what you'll see is that would provide a student population of close to 400 students, 394. Its capacity is about 528, and under that current model that I showed you, sending everyone back to their home school, they would have 541. So this would relieve some of this pressure on the number of students in that facility and provide some future growth for that neighborhood as well. And then at Lincoln Elementary, what this model would do would have a proposed student clientele of about 510 students. Its capacity is 572, and currently there are 536 under the model of moving everyone back to their home school. So this too then would relieve some of the pressure, but provide some future growth at that facility as well. As we look at Ed Clapp School itself and applying this model to those communities, what you'll see in your data packet would be this chart. On the left-hand side would be the grade levels K through 5. Across the top, what you'll see is the total number of students who this model would create, the number of rooms or sections we might anticipate, the ratio of students to teachers, and then the last set of data is really the students who are in that attendance area, out of it, or out of district. And because this would be a brand new attendance area, the last two of in-district transfers and out-of-district transfers are zeros. But if you look at the data, what you'll notice is if this model was applied to this year's students, you'd have approximately 81 kindergarteners, 85 first graders, and you can follow down that list. You would see we would need approximately 4 sections of kindergarten, 4 sections of first grade, and so on. So the building would start out at 3 or 4 sections, but what this would do is it would allow the larger sections of kindergarten and first graders as they progressed through the building to turn to from the current 3 sections to 4. So it would appear that over the immediate future that this building would be serving at its capacity. So the proposed elementary boundary changes certainly meet these 3 requirements, set that boundary attendance area for our new school, does reduce the number of students at Lewis and Clark and Lincoln, and provides for that future growth at Kennedy. Dr. Schatz and I would entertain questions.
Jim?
If I caught this right, and first of all, thanks for a lot of work. But we're building ourselves some future growth capacity at Ed Clapp, assuming that pre-kindergartners are going to equal the kindergarten class that you had up there if we had done it this year. And we have increased capacity now at Lewis and Clark under this proposal. Do you envision that at some point in time, that future capacity at Lewis and Clark will be used up too? Or is that just going to be freeboard that down, my concern is this, I guess. Let's say that we don't average 81 kindergartners coming into Ed Clap, and I'm not really sure that there's any increased housing that can go into the Lewis and Clark catchment area, maybe neighborhood turnover, if some baby boomers decide to sell their house. Theoretically, might we, 4 or 5 years from now, be seeing, for instance, the Ed Clap boundary move farther south than 32nd to get it to capacity if we don't have the growth through pre-K?
I can answer that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Because as your growth goes south, you're going to have to do something to adjust that, for that growth. So your move is going to be to move further south to go north, if you will.
Backfill in.
You're backfilling in. And with this plan here, we're thinking you have a window of 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
And that would then also give you more time, rather than having to build another elementary school, fill in the elementary schools. And so that's what we're trying to do, is create the opportunity for growth without having to build additional facilities.
Thank you.
And that's, Jim, kind of on the same take or tack as you were, when I'm looking at the utilization at Lewis and Clark, having been in the neighborhood forever, I don't think it's ever been below 400 kids at Lewis and Clark, I mean, that I can recall. And so I'm thinking we're have a excess capacity at Lewis and Clark, as Jim was talking about. And that's why I was curious as to what the student population would be in that northern Bluemont tier if we take just that. What does that do to the Lewis and Clark, and what does it do to the Ed Clap? And I withhold, any conclusion or further questions until I would have the answer to that question, because I'm not sure what that.
Madam President, Dr. Gross, I'm curious about the next step. And I think, first off, my first question, then I'll ask my second. But as this new elementary opens, confirm with me the status at that point of the Eagle Center. Then I'll go to my next question.
I can answer that, John. Right now, we haven't had that discussion. We've talked at one point, if you look at the map where Eagles would be, right around that Harwood Groves area, is that as Bennett grows, which it's going to, and it's going to reach capacity, would there be the opportunity to take Eagles and make it into an elementary school? And kind of a pocket elementary. We talked about this during the long-range facility planning, so about 350 kids. And then that would be able to take some of the Centennial kids and some of that northern tier of the Bennett area so that you can backfill up again and infill. So, and it would put off having to build something out per se on the Davies site.
If I might continue, Madam President, Dr. Schatz, you're reading my mind exactly of putting the Center for Educational Delivery where the people are, conceivably. And so that begs my next question. Have we run the scenario, Dr. Gross or Dr. Schatz, of what that would look like then? We have this phase now, and we'd have that expansion of population shifts. And I'm just curious, have we because when I was new to the board, the concerns of people around Kennedy were that we didn't see far enough into the future visually. So have we, with this approach of infill and having a pocket school conceivably where Eagles is now, have we looked at what the boundaries would look like then?
At this point, we haven't.
Okay.
We're trying to take a look at what we have before us now. But when we were doing the long-range facility planning, I did take a little bit of a look at it and what it might look like. It's really hard to not make it super messy, if you will, because it all depends, again, on the Bennett area and how much that grows and how fast it goes, and then how much of the northern tier of Bennett would have to move up in order to accommodate that growth. So what does that mean for Centennial? What would that mean for Ed Clap? What would that mean for Lincoln? And then if you were to put that pocket elementary in there, how would that impact those 4 attendance areas? So it's a little hard to kind of project right now what that might be without really knowing. But I think those would be the areas that you'd be looking at.
Trustee?
Just curious if you ran this scenario, Bob, and it'd be easier to show you, but I'll try to walk through it. But the yellow area right now, north of the interstate, if that stayed at Lewis and Clark, at Clap, if you would move that boundary to the east of 25th Street and say just over to 18th Street, and then that little area down south that's going to Centennial, if that would stay at Lincoln.
If I heard you correctly, we did run a scenario that would do something similar to that. That pushed Ed Clap School over its capacity with some of the younger grade levels. We would need 5 or more sections in some of those grade levels. So we did run that, or a similar scenario to what you described. And then if I may, the answer to the question of the number of students who are elementary age in that section north of 94, that is 91 elementary age students.
You. Dr. Gross, I happened to be last night at the Carl Ben Eielson Parent Night. We have a student that will be starting 6th grade next year. And the principal said that we will be at capacity at Carl Ben Eielson soon. And he wasn't factoring in, to the best of my knowledge, the Ed Clap Park students, Ed Clap Park School students who will be attending Carl Ben Eielson. Is Carl Ben Eielson going to be overcrowded, or is part of the reason to move the Jefferson and Claire Barton, parts of the Jefferson Claire Barton kids north to alleviate crowding at Carl Ben Eielson?
When I share the middle school and the high school scenario, we were very careful not to add too many students to that central part of town at South High School or Carl Ben Eielson. And the reason is at Carl Ben Eielson in particular, just the way it was designed, the number of classroom spaces that are available, we want to make sure that we stay under its capacity as well.
My second question is, at planning, we talked about sort of an alternative scenario that maybe did a little more assertive, made more of an assertive effort to speak to that guideline about aiming for a better socioeconomic mix at our middle and high schools. And most of the board members remember when I was first elected to the board, I tried to get the guideline changed to include elementary schools, and I went down in a ball of flames. But I would certainly like to see us make an effort at the middle and high school. Will we see a scenario that takes another stab at that before this comes back for action?
I certainly think that this is a first reading, and the feedback that I received tonight, or we received tonight, we will get additional information if that is what is requested.
John?
Madam President and Chris, I really, I know, I applaud you for that question and that concern, and I'm not sure there are answers. There is an implication of a cutting in half, roughly, with the projections of the free and reduced population at Kennedy. But we end up with a rather substantial population of free and reduced families at the new Ed Clap School. And I'm just curious, just thinking out loud, how could somebody address that, Dr. Gross? If there was, if the desire existed to find that balance, how could it be done? I'm just not sure what the options even are or not, but I agree that it's a principle we all, I think, adhere to as much as possible. And yet we have other schools like with much higher even, Jefferson, for example, with free and reduced population. So it's not like an anomaly entirely. But how could it ever be done if it were?
As I look at how we would shape the elementary boundaries, we would have schools who have attendance areas that are not all connected to one another. They would have to be separated, and you'd have different communities coming to an elementary school, so they wouldn't be contiguous to one another. It would cause, I would think, transportation issues. It would cause issues when it came to that neighborhood school concept. Your map would not look like this. It would look much different.
Shall we move on to the middle school, high school scenarios?
Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to share with you similar information about the middle school and the proposed boundary that we are moving forward. Here is our current middle school set of boundaries. It is the same middle school and high school. So further into the presentation, when I share information about the high school, the map will look very similar, just different colors for the different buildings. If we look at that set of boundaries, and again, we move all of the students back using the software to their home schools, this would be the data that we would see. We would have 3 middle schools with a variance of students or a difference of students of almost 280 from the smallest being Ben Franklin to the largest being Discovery Middle School. What that does is it causes difficulty as we look at our middle school philosophy of teaming and how do we have interdisciplinary teams at the middle school with class sizes of similar size at all 3 of our middle schools. But that's the data where we would start. So what we did is we tried to shift the boundaries to create 3 similar sized middle schools. And to do that, we would look at this as a suggestion, where, again, I superimpose the existing boundaries. The northern boundary right now is Main Avenue. If you instead go down and use 25th Street down to 5th Avenue South, use 5th Avenue South to University, go down University to 13th Avenue, using those major roadways, and that became the northern boundary. Then on the southern part of that area, if we shifted that southern boundary down to 32nd Avenue, to the east to 18th Street, where it is right now, and then over 35th Avenue, where it is right now, your boundaries would look like that. Based on that change, this is what the student populations would look like at those 3 middle schools. What you would see is we would narrow that difference of students down to about 90. But what you would notice is at Ben Franklin, we would actually add over 110 students. Discovery would become smaller by about 120 students. And we would get closer to 3 similar sized middle schools, which would definitely help as we talk about programming and the middle school philosophy, and would also provide for growth in the future at Discovery Middle School.
Rusty?
I do not have that information right now, but I can certainly find that information.
Chris?
Dr. Gross, all of that boundary changing, and there's only a difference of 8 students at Carl Ben?
Yes. Because what we have done is we've shifted both its northern boundary and its southern boundary. If then you look at the high school, again, here are our existing boundaries, the same as the middle school. Here would be the demographic information of our high schools, if, again, we moved all of our students back who had petitioned out, you would see we have a difference of about 240 students from our smallest high school at North to our largest at Davies. Again, trying to create those three similar-sized comprehensive high schools. We would suggest the same boundaries as the middle school. So again, there are the existing boundaries. It's that same line, 25th to 5th, University to 13th Avenue. And that same line of shifting to 32nd Avenue to 18th to 35th Avenue. What that does is this, to your information, it narrows that scope so that now there's a difference of about 130 students between our three comprehensive high schools. And North High School would actually gain approximately 150 students. Davies would be reduced by about 150 students, and South High School would remain approximately the same size for the same reason. But we're shifting both the northern and the southern boundary of that catchment area.
And we talked about this at governance, I think we talked about it at planning as well. And Chris had alluded to it earlier, and John talked to it as well. But when we take a look at the demographic piece of this, and is it easy to spin it out a little bit? Because right now there's quite a bit of demographic disparity, I would call it, between not only free and reduced, but also ESL students. At South is quite a bit more than the other two schools in both of those categories. And I know we've got the high schools and the middle schools are nice, square, manageable blocks right now. And for transportation purposes and for neighborhood purposes, that type of thing, it makes a lot of sense. And we've had this discussion numerous times, I think, over the last couple of years. Is there, and I think planning asked you, Dr. Gross, to see if there's any modeling you could do that would somehow reduce that disparity over, in one of the models. It may not even make sense, but when you put everything together, but I think it would be appropriate, at least for the district, to try and provide some type of modeling which would, anyway. And if we take a look at it, the modeling says this just can't work from a lot of different reasons. At least we've tried to look at it. I mean, an attempt to improve that disparity. I don't know if you've gone there yet, or if you've been working on that, or, okay, that's the question.
Dr. Schatz?
I had Bob run one scenario, and if you have it, Bob, you could pull it up. The what if. And it might take a minute to get it up on his computer here. While he's doing that, the north-south idea of boundary lines, the issue, the challenge that has been presented is, really where Davies High School is located, if it was over behind Walmart, it would set it up for a much better north-south boundary line type of adjustments. But because of where it's at, it makes that much more difficult. And that's just a side note, what Bob's getting us up, so.
There are certainly multiple different ways to take a look at designing the set of boundaries. But like Dr. Schatz mentioned, to try to balance even more closely those three categories on the demographic information that I shared with you, the free and reduced, special education, and ELL numbers, we would need to develop some type of boundary system like this, where instead of 25th Street being the boundary, we may need to move it over to 23rd Street, which gets that boundary close to Carl Ben Eielson. But we could provide a boundary like this on the north side. On the south side of this area, what we might need to do is go into this area just north of 32nd Avenue and extend that past 25th Street to 18th, and then possibly have these two sections that are right now Kennedy serve or go to South and Carl Ben Eielson. So this would just be one possible scenario, but what you would get is the map would look different. The boundaries would not be contiguous to one another, but that would provide some of what you had asked for.
You don't happen to have the actually demographic numbers associated with that?
I do.
I figured you did.
How did you come up with that? I'm just curious, like, I don't understand why that red chunk was to the left, and, I mean, what was the whole green space? Not only am I having trouble identifying the streets from the map, but wouldn't it be, instead of jogging over to that area to the left where there's that green section, wouldn't it make sense to just go straight south?
Well,
Community homes.
if you wanted to, oh, I'm sorry. If you want to have, spread out the socioeconomic, you have to move where the economic, where they are, you have to move that part of the thing from one district, one attendance area to the other. Anyway, I'll let you answer this demographic. You have to be specific.
So in order to get the free and reduced lunch percentages closer to one another, what we needed to do is look at the students in different parts of our community, and that was used then to create that second proposal. What you can see is that proposal, even shifting it somewhat dramatically like we did, still does not completely equalize those three different areas as we look at this demographic report, because what's in green would be the outcome of applying a boundary or a border system similar to that. But that does get it closer, but certainly not the same.
John?
Dr. Gross, I'm curious about an anomaly I'm noticing, and I'm not sure it's boundary related, but what Rick and Chris are getting at is this question of when you have socioeconomic parity, do the students from families with less social capital elevate further and farther? And then I'll connect it to the dropout rate. But when I see, and I'm not sure how to interpret this, but we have, and I don't see the same shift in English language learners or ESL students. So in elementary, we have 33.8% on free and reduced. In middle, we have 33.3% on free and reduced. Then we have a 20% drop on free and reduced by the time we get to the high school numbers. Am I to conclude that the students, some of those most at-risk students in poverty or closer to poverty, are more likely to be the dropouts? And is that what that number indicates?
No. It indicates self-reporting of their free and reduced status. And I can tell you, as a high school principal for many years, that was the biggest challenge we had, was for kids to get those forms filled out and actually submit them. So it's not a perfect science.
It's not a,
It's a self-reported. You have to fill out the form in order to receive free and reduced.
so do they go without food then?
No, at the high school level, you know.
I don't know, I'm just curious, this number,
I don't know if it's an issue of going without food. It's an issue of whether or not they're filling out the forms in order to receive that, and that's something that we really try to get
Okay.
them to do, but it's just, that's a major part of it.
so continuing, I can't necessarily draw a linear correlation then at all.
Absolutely not,
Okay,
not with dropouts.
thank you very much.
Not at all, yeah.
Rick?
Dr. Schatz, I'm glad you mentioned that. You said it's part of it. You know, you can't attribute that change just to self-reporting. I mean, there are issues, obviously, with, I think, dropout issues. We probably don't track it, maybe we do, but I think, you know, I all agree with your comment about it's part of it. You know, the self-reporting. There's other parts, obviously, as well, but.
There are, but I mean, you know, the whole free and reduced, when you look at that for SES status, is not a perfect science. It's a self-reported thing, and it's a self-filling out of the forms. But it's the best that we have when you work with these kinds of things in data. And it's what we have, and it's what schools use.
And I guess it's more noticeable in a high school level when you go through the lunch line. Your friends notice more whether you're being charged the full or the reduced, whereas at an elementary and middle school level, perhaps the parents are more in control of filling out the forms, and the kids are maybe less sensitive at that age level to the difference. But it's just an observation. Paul? Yeah, Paul first.
And I think one of the other problems that we face is it is very difficult to design the boundary system that will work for the Fargo Public Schools, depending upon which set of factors we use to try to define that boundary system. If we're going to be guided only by ESL numbers or only by free and reduced lunch numbers, or what other things will impact us, I think the reality is we can't can't hold ourselves in abeyance of those particular set of data, because it's a moving target. This year, the ESL may be a little more concentrated here, and this year, next year, it may be a little more concentrated somewhere else, and we're not going to keep adjusting the boundaries. So I think we have to do the best job we can without letting the ESL and free and reduced lunch totally dominate where our boundary lines are going to be. We just have to do the best we can based upon what we see right now. And I really don't think that we can necessarily make each school equally balanced as far as those areas. In fact, there may be some advantage in having stronger ESL concentrations at certain schools so that we can focus more resources there, rather than saying we have an equally diluted number at each of the secondary schools.
Chris and then Jim?
I have a question about backfill. I don't have anything else nice to say. If we're backfilling, are we still looking for another school somewhere around the Walmart, as you noted? I would hate for us to get far ahead of ourselves, to let time pass and not acquire land where we know we're going to have it, where we wind up with a situation where everybody can look at the map and point to Ed Clapp Park and say that's where we should have a school, right? So we're kind of groping for land at the last minute. And I know that we want to backfill our schools and make sure that they're working at capacity, but at the same time, I would hate for us to kind of put all our eggs in the Davies site basket and have all the land get sort of gobbled up, and then we're sort of scrambling. That was a long-winded question. My question is, are we still looking to acquire land somewhere between Kennedy and Davies?
Yes.
Okay.
Haven't done it yet.
You guys are
Summer
good with the
project.
one-word answers. Brock, did you teach him that?
Summer project. But we will be looking at, this summer, once we settle on what our boundary lines are going to be, so we can move forward with that. Then we're going to look at, okay, what's the next step? The Eagles Center, looking at land out by Walmart, looking at, the Davies site, looking at the data as it comes to us next year, and we see what we have coming in, trying to project out to the next 4 or 5 years. So yes, that's all part of the plan, part of the long-range facility plan, and that'll be the next step in the process. So, yes.
Jim?
Thank you. I think, John asked a question, and we've surfaced it a couple of different ways. How do you go about fixing the problem of balancing demographics? I think the short answer is forced busing, which is not always a good approach, and not everybody's going to appreciate it. We're dealing with a zoning issue here, and what we really need to think about is where this district's going to be 20 years from now, just as much as we have to think about it today. When I drive into South Fargo, Southwest Fargo, and probably West Fargo's new areas, and I start seeing apartment buildings that look like they probably have 2,000 units in them, you're seeing a future school socioeconomic problem neighborhood. Now, in fairness to our current city leaders, I think the current planning process is to force all levels of housing in new developments, single-family, multi-dwelling, different price ranges, different sizes, so you get a dispersed population as those neighborhoods develop. I think one thing we could do as a school district is, first of all, thank them for that shift of philosophy, but also send a letter reinforcing the need for that, in particular as they look at these massive apartment building projects they're putting up. I think part of your demographic issues that you're all looking at up here are going to fix themselves when I see some of the apartment buildings that are being built out in South Fargo. Because they are going to be ultimately housing lower income tenants just by the very nature of what they're building. And so I think thanking the city for taking a different approach to new development and reinforcing how that helps us have a more balanced population catchment area, if that's the right term, which in the long run is probably better for all of the students in Fargo Public Schools. So I think while we deal and struggle with what we have right now, we really should be thanking the city and keeping them focused on future development, and maybe not have 5,000 apartment units in one quarter section of land, if at all possible, to avoid doing.
Does anyone, John?
I have my simplest question that I just need to ask just cause. I'm wondering, you know, when you take these maps, why we don't do a compass and run circles around schools. And I know some of them are near edges of boundaries, but you go out with those compasses and you go out a ways and go out a ways and go out a ways, and pretty soon you see some areas of overlap where you have options, but you also have centralized schools. Is that ever done? Circular around?
When I have been looking at this information, both this time and with the past boundary committees, instead of doing a circle, what we attempted to do was look at neighborhoods or blocks around natural boundaries, and then say, what if? And what if those shifted to the next adjacent elementary or middle school? Just because of the guidelines of using those natural boundaries whenever possible, we didn't do a circle, but we did say, what's that next neighborhood that we could look at, analyze, and see what would happen if it shifted to a different school.
Go ahead.
More of a rectangular approach.
Yeah.
I am a square.
Yeah.
Just had to say that, John.
Linda?
And I think I remember someone asked you if you had tried the vertical Jefferson CBE. But is that something you could, did you take a look at it and it didn't make the final cut? Or did you not, say, send Jefferson South, send Clare Barton, Hawthorne North?
That is one thing
Around.
in its entirety that I did not do, but I could get that data.
I think it would be helpful if we just knew what it was.
Paul?
And which one would go north and which one would go south. I don't know if that makes a difference.
And Bob, this data is probably submerged in here somewhere, but to me, I always like to see, well, where's it at now and where will the change be? I mean, we could probably find that, and much of it's probably in here, but that to me is real clarity when I say, oh, that school went from 582 kids down to 476, and this one's going up, and, you know, we see those things. So maybe upon the next iteration, that would be a good thing to do.
Have it side by side instead of separate.
I can certainly do that.
Are there any other comments or concerns about this overall presentation that information people need before, in order for the next meeting? Rick?
I'd like to ask if since this is a first draft or first viewing by the board, ask administration to take a look at the Prairiewood area north into Lewis and Clark. The numbers you've just gave me, it seems very doable. I think the biggest issue you have then is the Ed Clap population isn't high enough, is what it looks like. I mean, when I take the numbers and divide them up, but then you've got Lincoln, which is still very, very high compared to the rest of the schools, and you've got some boundary issues there. So just asking to take a look. I mean, I know you've got a lot of different generations going on. Take a look at what that would actually result.
I can just answer one quick thing for you, Rick, is that we do have a need in that school for a few special programs that we have. And so that would take up more space. And the other thing is that as we look at that Prairiewood area, we can certainly look at, you know, a below 94 type model, but then we got to think about the relief at Lewis and Clark, then where does that come from? Because that's the challenge we have right now. And the numbers are just growing there quickly.
And I don't know the
they're just-
demographic or the
Yeah.
population projections,
So-
that type of thing, but when I see there's over almost 60 students just between the North Bluemont and I-94, you know, you've already relieved a significant amount from Lewis and Clark. When I said you're below 400, I've never seen Lewis and Clark below 400 ever. And
Well, we can certainly cut that and take a look at it.
there might be some other adjustments too,
Yep.
because Lincoln remains very high still, when I look at that.
And I've asked that question as to why is Lewis and Clark and Lincoln all of a sudden experiencing, you know, such robust enrollments? And it really, the turnover in the apartment buildings in those areas, and then a little bit of flipping going on in the neighborhoods of younger couples moving in, older couples moving out, and that's what we're experiencing there. And projected to experience that probably for the next couple of years. So that's why we're trying to be sensitive with those numbers too.
Chris?
I have one last comment. It's hard, I can't let the phrase forced busing go by without saying something about it. You may have left the planning meeting before we had this discussion, but we had a really thoughtful, very measured discussion about making small tweaks that nobody was talking about, forcing kids to, you know, bus here, bus there, just to get equal mix. I don't think anybody was aiming for exactly equal, just improved. And so I just wanted to say that forced busing is not a topic that really was ever discussed, because it's not really what I think anybody that brought up a socioeconomic mix was aiming for. So just to be clear, that's what took place at the planning meeting.
And to piggyback on that, I would like to reemphasize that I don't think we can allow the outcome of the boundary discussion to be ruled by any one of those subsets of data, including socioeconomic, ESL, and other things like that. It's, I think that would be a mistake. I think we have to look at natural boundaries, we have to take a look at where people live, and we have to let the situations develop as they will. We'll certainly massage and try to manage some things, but I really think we'd be going down the wrong road if we try to make every boundary deal with those particular columns of data. That I think will be difficult. And the second thing I'd like to say is, as I understand, in a way this is a first reading, but it's really a first draft. This is not something that will then go to a second reading next meeting and be voted on necessarily. It may be voted on, but we certainly have new iterations to come forth in the future. And I think it's good to know that, because it may get reported as if this is first reading and then next week we're gonna vote on this. And that's not necessarily the route we're gonna go down, at least as I see it. I don't know how other people feel.
Does administration feel confident that they have information that they need in order to move ahead and bring us back additional pieces? And Dr. Schatz, Dr. Gross, do you have any questions?
Take good notes, Bob?
Hopefully Anne Marie took good notes.
No,
Yeah.
I think we have enough to work off of where we can
Okay.
come back and give you some other looks at it and try to answer some of the questions that have been brought forth. And, you know, it's up to you as a board to give us the direction of when it's done. We don't have any preconceived notion that any certain plan is a done deal. We are going to bring to you what you asked for, and if we need to go back and do some more work, we'll continue to bring it to you until you give us the go-ahead and say that this is the plan we're gonna go with, so.
One thing I think that would be helpful going forward is as you bring additional pieces of information that modify what we already have, to show us what you told us originally, this is how we adjusted it based on what you asked for or whatever, so that people can compare what it looked like, because 2 weeks from now, not all of this will be fresh in everybody's mind. And what questions arose today might be forgotten when the next plan comes up, and I think that would be very helpful. So folks, hang on to all the papers you were given this week so that perhaps you can bring those again next week, and you'll have those to compare with whatever comes up going forward, so. I guess so. I was gonna finish this first staff report section and do other reports. So Brock, do you have anything under other?
Nothing at this time.
Rachel? Bob?
Nothing at this time.
Dr. Schatz? Anne Marie? No. Okay, we will now have a 10-minute break. I can't really see the clock clearly, but just before 1:45, I think. Thank you. Oh, is it? I can't. 10:02, he says, the shadow, and I can't see it clearly. It's too late now, I got somebody else to do it. Thank you. We're back in session, welcome. We are at the consent agenda. I would entertain a motion. Chris?
I move approval of the consent agenda as presented with the
HR addendum.
HR addendum.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Passed. Thank you very much. We're now at the business section. Rick first. Budget assumption, please.
I believe just planning
Okay,
and
so-
governance maybe.
These are some real basic assumptions where we're currently at, and the budget is obviously still in progress. I think there's actually a meeting this Thursday coming up, Thursday, with the administrative council, next Thursday.
22nd.
Well, no, not of planning, I'm talking of the internal group.
Oh,
Administrative
yes.
group,
Yeah.
coming up to work on.
This Thursday, yes, there's a combined principals meeting. Yes.
Okay. And so there are some items here that are currently in the budget, they're after the budget that we just want to cover and let people know where it's at. And Brock, jump in if I misspeak and correct me. Right now, the significant changes, not every change, but the significant changes start out with the revenue side, the property tax. And we're looking right there, a net of about 3.2% increase. Now, we've gotten some preliminary numbers from the city, which would indicate perhaps a little bit higher, but then there's the holdback piece. So that number is again, pretty preliminary. It's fairly, I think it's somewhat conservative right now, but we'll find out more as the city refines its numbers for the property tax values going forward. Go ahead, Brock.
While you're on that subject, members of the board, I would tell you that, remember, we typically budget at about a 95% collection rate as well. So we never, we typically, I shouldn't say never, typically we don't realize 100% collection in a given year. There is a line in our budget for prior year property tax collections. So whatever that growth is, we generally do not collect 100% of that in any one year as well.
That just rolls forward year to year, and so we try to take that into consideration. The second line item is the S&L tax. I think we've talked about this as well. There's been an S&L tax that's been a part of the district's revenue in past years. In 13-14, estimated about 1.6 million. With legislative changes, the district no longer will receive that S&L tax, so there's a shortfall of 1.6 million for 2014-15. And the state per pupil aid projected revenue is increased almost 4 million to 3.9 million for 14-15 for a net increase of those three major topic items of about 3,448,000. On the expense side, most everyone's aware of the fact that we have negotiated 2-year contracts. So within that 2-year contract, given the increase, the attrition, and some changes, we're looking at about a 3.4% increase in salaries. Health insurance, last year we were very fortunate with the health insurance expense. Blue Cross has indicated that this year, I think their first indication, Brock, was 17% increase.
Correct.
Right now, in the budget, we're looking at about a 9% increase in our health insurance costs. Again, I think some further negotiations and work to be done in that area for health insurance. That's an $840,000 increase in expenses. TFFR, again, most of us are aware of the fact that the required employer portion of TFFR is increasing from 10.75% to 12.75%. That's a $1.2 million increase in expenses. North Dakota PERS is also increasing the 1% annual increase on 1/1 of every year. The current year increase then is estimated at $242,000. And then by design, the board, through the long-range facility process and additional discussion, the board has decided, at least at this point, through administration's recommendations, to increase the annual maintenance in 14-15 to $3 million, and that results in $850,000 increase. So with that, the total expenses of just of those significant items increased $5,776,000. So the shortfall between the increase in the revenue and the increase in the expenses is about $2.3 million currently. And Brock, how does that actually tie into the current budget estimate, bottom line of the budget? I mean, these are the major items. For,
Members of the board, Rick, when you say current, where we're at right now
Right now
with
with the
the
draft, yeah.
projection draft? Our total number right now is closer to between 2.5 and 2.6 million. What we really tried to show you here were the major line items. As you're aware, our general fund budget has several line items, some ranging from, you know, as little as maybe $2,500 up to probably the biggest one of $77 million. And so obviously, what I try to do is show those ones that had the most significant impact. So right now, we're sitting between 2.5 and 2.6 as a deficit today. But as work continues and we bring that for preliminary review, we have an obligation to bring you a balanced budget, and we will do everything in our power to do that.
and some of the future changes, as we indicated, would be in refinement of the property tax revenue. We get a better idea where that's at. Attrition, savings, and our salary costs, we'll have a better idea where that's at as time goes on here. So those are two of the major areas. The piece on the very bottom of that schedule that you have is net changes really due to statute changes, and something that we really don't have a lot of control over. The first one's the SNL loss of the SNL tax revenue, 1.6 million, the TFFR increase, and the North Dakota PERS increase. Those three items alone, we have a decrease in our revenue, an increase in our expenses of almost $3.1 million. That's where we currently sit.
Paul?
Rick, I have a couple of questions. The first one, they kind of progress in complexity maybe as we go forward. Does anyone have any idea, first of all, the tax revenue from the savings and loans that we are no longer receiving is being received, however, by the county, is that correct?
I do not know that, Paul.
Members of the board, Paul, I got some additional clarification on that through the county. And the savings and loan tax, as it existed, was eliminated. And then there is a different model, as I understand it, for how revenues are received through the counties from the savings and loans. They do see a loss as well with some of that, but they do pick up some additional revenue in another manner, as I understand it, from our county commissioner. But the school districts no longer will be receiving any of those dollars due to the elimination of that savings and loan tax.
So is the net for the previous tax was based on property as well as other factors on the savings and loan?
I don't know all the logistics of that. Jim, I know you've looked into it some. I don't know if you have additional information in that regard.
I think it's actually it's a very complicated formula. The receiving school district, it was based upon where the SNL's property was located. The assessment of the tax itself was a function of their operating net income statements, was my understanding.
So anyway, it sounds like perhaps the savings and loans net will realize a gain from this rather than a loss, which.
Say that, no, we'll have a zero, we'll have a loss.
We'll have a zero.
Yeah, we'll have a zero loss.
Well, no, we'll have a loss.
$1.6 million loss.
The savings and loans, however, will probably pay less in taxes, it sounds like. If they're not paying it to us and they're only paying a modified model to the county, they're getting a little, so that's fine. I'm just trying to dig deeper into it. The second one is, you mentioned that Blue Cross has threw out a number of 17, but now they've settled at a very moderate 10% or something like that. What's our health experience been as far as our health losses?
Brock answer that, because they haven't settled on this number.
No.
Paul, this is what we're currently using in the budget. Okay, but I'll let Brock go first.
Members of the board, Paul, as Rick indicated, last year we had a very fortunate year as far as an increase. We increased our health insurance premium 1.9%. Currently, our funding compared to our claims paid as a self-funded, of course, we really are paying those claims through our funding. We are running just slightly ahead from a collection standpoint versus payment. All projections are that at the end of the year, that's going to probably be within 0.5%, probably to our favor. So we are having a better year, which is good. obviously, we have claims less currently than what we've paid. And I would like to reiterate something Rick said, that the initial number, and we see this nearly every year, and one of the challenges we have is we get the projections from Blue Cross Blue Shield so late in the game. And their first projection is typically high, and it is this year, it's 17%. Last year, their initial projection was 12%. We ended up in the 3.5% to 4.5% and finalized at 1.9. So I think the initial numbers are typically very, however you define conservative, on which side of the aisle you're on in that. So I do believe it will be less, but we're trying to be realistic. When I first started this modeling, based on our current experience, I had 4%. And when I saw the 17, I clearly understood I needed to adjust that. So I picked 10 and realized that if I can balance at that, then we've got some room on either side of that, and I don't know where we'll end up ultimately.
I guess the reason I ask that is I'm just wondering how any outside firm would justify raising our costs if our self-insurance has been running at a pretty much a net zero type of situation. In other words, we're not paying out more than we're collecting. So that's just a thought for our health people to take a look at as they go forward. And the last one is, I don't know if we've ever said it, but we, as well as the city of Fargo and anybody else that's a part of the any of the state investment programs, are mandated now to pay higher TFFR and North Dakota PERS payments, not because those people are getting a better retirement or because of any other changes, other than the fact that the state and its investment board underperformed in their management. And, it's probably good that we say that sometime in a public situation. So I just said it.
John?
Madam President, members of the board, I'm guessing, Paul, with insurance, there's a $72 million loss that's going to subscribers. And some notices with this budget overall. We're focusing, we see the S&L loss, and then we are looking at a 2.2% valuation increase. We have, is it up to 3 point?
Well, what the calculation here is 3.2 currently.
3.2, okay. And I'm assuming, I know you can't assume, but I'm guessing in our increase in state per pupil aid that we're calculating in maybe a couple hundred new students, which is in each year we're having a population growth. So that's in there. What I'm curious about, Brock, is the bigger picture of the 13-14 budget versus the 14-15 budget. I believe the last I heard and saw was that with the 125 mills in property tax reductions in the last two legislative assemblies, that we had gotten up to about 69% state funding of our budget. I believe is the last number I'd heard. Do you know what that picture will look like going into the next budget year, the federal, the state, and the local?
Members of the board, John, I do not have an exact calculation of that. What I would give you, just from what we're looking at here, you obviously see the $94.3 million in foundation aid. We're going to receive just shy of $900,000 in transportation aid, so that'll bring us to a little over $95 million. Our current, what we're looking at right now for a total budget is approaching $140 million. So without quick math here, without the appropriate tools, whatever percent 95 million is of 140 million would be the short answer to the state aid piece. I want to clarify something, John, in regards to growth of students. You recall that we receive foundation aid based on prior year enrollment, and so we will receive that. That number that we have there is a projection currently from DPI based on the last biennium and the reports that we submit and all the demographic data that they use to project, okay, what do we think the growth will be in Fargo? What have the trends been? Based on the new foundation aid of 90-92, that's a projection we're using based on what we've gotten from DPI. They've considered whatever they determine Those birth rates will have been 6 years ago, and what do we think we'll report for at year end? And so we're basing that number purely on those projections today. So there's some growth in there, but it's not we think we're growing about 200. We're really counting on DPI's number, and once we report out our final number, that's how we get paid on the prior year.
Linda?
And it's 68%.
Exactly.
Any other questions or comments? In that case, thank you very much. We look forward to the next piece of information. Mr. Johnson, legislative objectives for 2015.
Appreciate it. GAC has been diligently working over the last few months on trying to come up with some recommendations, working with Dr. Schatz and his team as to what we might want to put forward as our legislative objectives for the coming legislative session in 2015. We are here at the board meeting tonight to walk you through what topics we at GAC have identified and narrowed down to get feedback from you and hopefully start the process of trying to prioritize what our legislative package will look like. In Memo 123, just kind of a general overview, there are several topics that we are well aware may surface in Bismarck, and as we have in the past, thanks in large part to the administrative team's work and Brock in particular, they'll be tracking every bill that comes forward that could have an impact to the district. And there is no doubt in my mind we will be asked as a board to take positions on bills we don't even know about yet because there will be plenty of new things that surface. But there are 4 topics that we are not per se advocating any legislation on, but more to have on our radar that if these surface, we will definitely be taking positions probably of a particular direction. At least that's the recommendation of the GAC committee. And for each of these, I'm going to also share with the board what other educational organizations are doing position-wise as well. In particular, the North Dakota School Board Association and the North Dakota Association of School Administrators. So the 4 topics that we don't suggest become our legislative priority, but they be front and center in our thinking as legislation surfaces, have to do with private school vouchers, state mandates concerning how we spend the foundation aid dollars that come to us, building fund levy restrictions, and any significant modification of the North Dakota state standards that some people refer to as Common Core standards. As you can see, we have taken the position, at least from a GAC recommendation, that we would oppose those type efforts if they start to surface out in Bismarck, obviously subject to the specific language of a bill. Just for reference point on private school vouchers, the North Dakota Association of School Administrators also has a position against it. The North Dakota School Board Association has no position regarding private school funding at this point in time, although I suspect it'll be coming forward at our fall convention. State mandates, both the Administrators Association and the State School Board Association have standing positions in opposition to any imposed state mandates on how we spend our foundation aid dollars. Building fund levy restrictions, again, both organizations are on record in opposition to any restrictions on the current property tax or taxing authorities of school districts. And the elimination of the North Dakota state standards, sometimes referred to as Common Core. The Administrators Association has taken a position to oppose any significant modification to them, and it is not currently got a resolution of any type at the State School Board Association, although that too could change come this fall. The 7 topics, yep.
Sorry, could Linda just go
Can I
ahead?
ask before we get into it, if I remember right, doesn't NDSBA kind of set their priorities during the summer? Isn't it right after we change over that they?
There are 2 processes that go on, and a third one that can happen right at the conference. School districts can submit resolutions for consideration prior to the state GAC meeting, which happens at the middle of August. Hence, that's why we're doing this work right now. The state board, which will be meeting in June, has a laundry list of possible legislative topics that they may suggest that the association also take a position on. And in addition to those 2 ways, a district can bring to the floor itself, it's a little more difficult process then, but can bring to the floor themselves any item they want to at the annual conference. So yes, and that's in part why we wanted to get this work done out of the GAC committee and to this board. So if we're going to address something back to the State School Board Association, we can get it put together and submit it on time. Because that's going to have to happen in the July timeframe, and hopefully we'll have a head start on it after tonight. So the 7, oh, go ahead, John.
Madam President, Jim, I made a commitment today when I had a phone call from a constituent, and maybe some of you heard also. Scott Hennon called me and was talking about the private school vouchers issue. And it took me a few minutes to realize I wasn't being interviewed. So I began to listen a little differently. But I did indicate I would, and we all know there's a diverse view out there on this. And his concerns were that we ought not, as representatives of the people, question anything which would give people a break, an incentive of $1,500 tax credit for if and when they send their kids to private schools. And I know there's a debate, and I was suggesting, well, you know, they're all religious. There's no private schools that aren't parochially involved. But I understand your concerns. I think his kids are maybe in private schools, and I said our job as stewards of public education is to not contribute to anything that would erode our position relative to our mandate to deliver education to the public and to sectors of the public that might not be serviced by private schools, because we have a general mandate to educate all children. But where we kind of ran into a little discussion that I would throw out there just is the notion of, would there be a trade-off? I'm guessing that if there are people incented, so families incented with a tax credit to send students to private schools, I'm guessing there would be a loss of some numbers in the public sector. I'm guessing this. I don't know the data. And I'm guessing then that $1,500 tax credit could conceivably translate into a $9,000 plus diminished per pupil aid reimbursement to districts. But I promised I would reflect this view to the board and indicate that, because there are people that have lots of views about this, and he was taking the time to call, so I said I would share that with you all.
Just to clarify, the private school voucher is different than a tax credit for private schools. And we did talk about both of these at GAC and didn't, at this point in time, have any recommendation to the board on the tax credit side. The vouchers, however, we believe, and I don't disagree with your theory that it could end up costing us a student, but this position is on vouchers, not on tax credits, at least the recommendation for this position. What I'd like to do is run through the 7 topics briefly, then take questions on them, and feel free to have other GAC members or Dr. Schatz to help me on any of those questions. And then what we'd really like you to do as a board member is to rank what you believe out of these 7 is your number 1 or number 2, so that we can boil that down at the next GAC committee, hopefully come back with a finalized recommendation for the board to consider at one of our June meetings, with the idea that then we can then reach out to whatever processes we're going to talk about, whether it's submitting a resolution to the state board, whether it's working with area legislators to see if we can get language put together for these things, so we can get in front of this game as opposed to playing catch-up. The first topic is not a new one, and it was our top priority last legislative session, and that would be to secure some form of separate state funding for pre-K education. There are a number of ways this could go forward, from getting some allocation or grant program put in that school districts could apply for, to partnering with other providers of preschool education, whether it's the Y or Montessori or whoever. And again, both the Administrators Association and the School Board Association already have positions of support for separate state funding for pre-K education. The second one is a change to use fall actual enrollment numbers for the state aid formula. That very topic that was just getting talked about at the end of the last budget assumption discussion. We currently will use our spring number of this year, and that's what will be paid on next year. There is a catch-up formula for districts that have growth greater than 4%. The larger your district, the more difficult it is for you to meet that 4% threshold, and we have not. And then if you do meet the 4% threshold, you don't necessarily get the full foundation aid payment. There's an offset formula. It equates to about 50% of a foundation aid payment. This change, currently we in part use this year's number next year to help school districts that are having declining enrollment. They basically get paid for phantom students, and districts that have actual students above their spring count get to absorb those students into their budget somehow. And I get the fact that if there's an empty chair in one of the classrooms, that's easy to do. If you're adding 200 students and you're adding some staff to teach them, you didn't absorb them without absorbing increased costs. So we are suggesting that we advocate for a fall enrollment number to be used. The actual number of students in seats is what you get paid for. Or we could try to work with other organizations and see if there's some way we can modify the language on the growth formula right now, the 4% threshold. I know that's the position, one of the positions that the Administrators Association is looking at. Our third one is increased state funding for ELL students, and I apologize to the board. I did not have adequate time to, one of the things I would like to have had for you is a breakout of what we actually are spending for ELL students versus what the additional allocations that we get from the state are. Because we do get extra money, because we have people identified as level 1, 2, or 3 ELL students. And the formula drops depending upon what the level is. We will have that data, so when we go forward, if this is in our final top priorities, we will have the background information that we're going to want to have. Currently, the Administrators Association and School Board Association have no position on this topic. That's, I'm going to guess, in part because there aren't that many districts that deal with this issue. Although that being said, it's the bigger districts that are dealing with this issue, and there are going to be more of them going forward with what's going on out in western North Dakota and the population that's been moving in there to go to work in the Bakken oil fields. Let me just get through all 4, or all 7 real quick, then we'll open it up to questions. Number 4, increased state funding for special education students. Again, I don't want to mislead. We certainly get additional allocation on somebody identified as a student receiving special education services. But again, we do not believe that it is adequately covering the costs that we experience as a district. In all fairness to the state, this is more, in my opinion, a federal issue than a state issue. But at the end of the day, the feds aren't going to give us any more money, so we're going to have to advocate for the state to give us some money. And that's what that one's about. Again, eventually, this is my dropping the ball because the administration's been pretty busy getting a budget put together. We will have the hard data of what are we spending on our special education students versus what are we receiving both in federal funds and additional state funds, so we can see what amount of property tax or other foundation aid is going to these students that are not going to be fully funded for this particular mandate. Number 5 is a replacement or a reinstitution for the S&L taxes. We just saw that in the budget assumptions, the $1.6 million loss. Back up on special ed. Both associations, the administrators and the school board association, both have resolutions of support for that concept as well. Reinstatement of savings and loan taxes to local districts. The North Dakota Administrators Association has taken a position to address this. It has not been a topic in the past for the North Dakota School Board Association. And again, just so everybody's aware of it, not all districts were receiving this money because not all districts had savings and loans located in them. Obviously, it's a bigger city issue again, and I think Fargo was far and away the biggest recipient of this particular tax. Changes to TFFR and PERS. There are 2 possible positions that we might consider to advance here. One would be to have the state infuse one-time funding to try and get these particular plans back to whatever level of solvency they're shooting for and relieve some of the mandatory assessment coming to districts and potentially districts' employees. The other possible position that we could advance would be to freeze the current defined benefit plans and for new hires and for future years of existing hires, go to a defined contribution plan, which quite frankly is exactly what's happened in the private sector over the last 20 years. As you might imagine, there is no position by the Administrators Association to do either of those, although I don't think they would oppose a one-time funding brought by the state to relieve some of the assessments going into the system. They are adamantly opposed to changing to a defined contribution plan. North Dakota School Board Association sort of has a position on this in that we would like the state to not allow an increase to the benefit formula until this thing is fully solvent, and to fully fund any future increased assessments that come because of it. Those 2% increases we experienced right now, the 1% going forward we're going to see in PERS. So 2 possible positions we could advocate for. There will be bills in the legislature at least on one, if not both those positions from what we've been told. And finally, support increased funding for the school construction loan program. I think you're all aware of the fact we would have loved to have been able to get some of these dollars, and we're still hopeful that maybe we can for the Ed Klopp Elementary School, but the demand outstripped the allocation that came in the last legislature, which was a pretty big increase. I mean, I got to give a tip of the hat to the legislature, but with the increased growth out in western North Dakota, the increased growth in some of our big cities, that money evaporated about as fast as it was made available. And again, the Administrators Association has a position supporting increased school construction loan. There is no position currently by the North Dakota School Board Association. So those are the 7 that GAC is recommending. We're certainly open to any questions, and then ultimately I'd like you to rank these and get that sheet back to us.
John and then Paul.
Madam President, Jim, this isn't a question, it's information to share. A prominent large business in town recently indicated to me that their employment base reflects 27 different countries. And they have a wall of these 27 flags of representing the employees of that company. I was curious about the school district's reflection of cultures and countries. And after asking Anne Marie what we know about the current information, the last count I understood was we have students in K through 12 from 26 different countries. So this is very important information for us to keep in our mind as we contemplate or understand the ELL English language learners' needs. That's all I have to say, Madam President.
Jim, I'd like to give you a chance to comment on items number 3 and 4 with an answer that we probably already know, but it might be good to put this out because it might help us determine how we would like to advocate in the future when we go to the state. With regards to number 3 and number 4, would it be fair to say that our position as a Fargo Public School District, as one of the many school districts in the state, that our position with ELL and also special education students has probably contributed to, and perhaps rightly so, contributed to the increased cost per student of education that we see?
For Fargo?
Yes.
Well, clearly, both of these populations take additional resources, and for a number of factors, Fargo is a magnet for both of these populations. We are a big medical center, so a lot of, and you know, special education is a broad range, you know, and it's difficult to identify and say special ed student costs X because you may have somebody that has a very slight disability, but nonetheless has been identified and is being served, to somebody that needs a full-time para for one student, all 5 days of the week. So yes, significant portions of our budget go to both of these populations to do the best job we can. And obviously what we would be advocating for is full funding of the differential from the foundation aid to what it's costing to serve those students. And again, I need to clarify, or at least make sure it's not misinforming anybody. On the special ed front, this is a federal mandate that has went unfunded by the federal government since the day they gave us the mandate. And the state has stepped to the plate, just not enough to make up the entire gap that the Fed has left us with. ELL, again, we get some dollars from the federal government, but they're, because of our community, because of employers like Cardinal Glass, I don't know if that's where you were, and because of Lutheran Social Services, we become a landing spot for a number of those families. And we're a pretty welcoming community, but they bring pretty high needs until we can get through that language barrier. And of course, I think we see the beauty of that diversity when we go through the Agassi building from the adult side of it, which is really a program that there isn't much funding for. We find the resources. In the K-12 environment, those students are really spread throughout the buildings and are getting services delivered depending upon their level. We get an additional allocation of money for everyone that's identified as level 1, a less amount for level 2, a less amount for level 3. But, and Dr. Gross, I've heard it from him many times before, I'm sure he can correct me if I'm wrong, just because you graduated from level 3 doesn't mean you didn't still need services. It just meant we weren't getting any funding for the services, additional funding at that point in time. These students need lots of extra time, and with that time, remarkably, they can integrate pretty well and end up being presidential scholars. Did that long answer to your question? Did that take care of it? Yeah, could you roll the tape back?
Yeah, Jeff?
I just wanted to make one comment about ELL students in particular, and that is, right now, the amount of services that we're able to provide are very basic, very basic. It's English, maybe it's a science or a math, but I'm not only thinking funding just to meet those needs, but funding to expand upon the needs that we have. Many of those students have to go into regular ed classrooms for those other classes without any support at all, because we don't have the money for it. We don't have the support systems in place for it. And so that's the challenge that we have with our new American population for those kids that are in those, particularly level 1 and 2, really is a challenge. And so it's more than just additional funds to kind of supplement what we're doing. It's so that we can provide what I would call an adequate level of education for those students in services. So that's all.
John?
Madam President, members of the board, I'll just think out loud for a moment. Since I've been on the board in '08, I want to say that the number of students born on the autism spectrum were 1 in something like 110. And I believe that now, they're saying that 1 in 54, 1 in 54 boys, and 1 in, what's the number then for the overall population?
The figure that just came out from the CDC is 1 in 68 kids will be born on the autism spectrum.
And thank you, Chris. And you know this field. And boys are more prevalent to have autism beyond the spectrum than girls. So there's a train coming down the tracks at public education. And it's our families and our people's children that have these needs in their homes. And so I just really have, I know where my highest priorities are here is kids-related education and core curriculum delivery things in my list here.
Does anyone have any additional comments or questions for Jim? How would you like us to proceed? Oh, I'm sorry, Linda?
The TFFR PERS, that's kind of an either-or approach. Are we talking about which approach yet, or just somewhere?
I actually think both of these are going to surface from different ends or different legislators. And I think either is a fix that helps where our issues are. Because realistically, we're now at about 25% of our payroll cost relating to retirement plans. And, you know, granted, we pay the teachers and the administrators, and they have to contribute. But it's 25% collectively of payroll going in for a retirement plan. And as you look at the demographics, as we grow as a district, we're going to have more staff. And as Paul rightfully pointed out, there's actually two factors driving it, Paul. It isn't just maybe the investment funds didn't do as well as they could have or should have, but it's also a longevity factor. The longer our retired teachers that are already retired live, the more dollars are drawn out of this defined benefit system too. So with life expectancy improvements that Sanford is doing with whatever they're going to genetically be able to figure out, they're pushing this solution farther and farther down the road. Rusty and I attended a TFFR presentation, I think it was at the last state association meeting. It's 25 years based upon the current forecast they had then, now it's a year old now, before they think there's going to be any relief to this percentage. Based upon the demographics that they're looking at, the fund balance, the number of teachers on line to retire. We look at it when we approve those retirements, and we think about what we had to pay out in longevity and how that increased because more people were retiring. Well, it's not just longevity, they also are submitting their paperwork to TFFR at the same time, or to PERS. So I think we probably want to be able to be in a position to support either of these approaches going forward. A grandfathered approach to current employees, but a new plan for new hires, or some help from the state to get these things more fully funded and maybe back a little bit off the percentage assessment that's coming at us right now. I think we need to be prepared to voice in on either of those approaches.
So how would you like us to proceed now, Jim? Do you want
Well,
us?
I would like people, and if you want to put your name on it, you can, but I only handed them out to board members, I think. If you would just take the time to rank, and you can write a title or a number and get this back to me, we'll get it put back together at governance, and Mary Ann will do a very nice job of making us look professional, as she always does. And we'll come back with what we believe would be a ranking order for the board to then take official action on, and assuming we took that official action, it'll become the legislative packet that the administration and GAC will work to put together for the coming season. And again, I need to thank Brock and Dr. Schatz. They've worked diligently with GAC and accumulating possible topics. And just be aware of the fact there will be other things that come forward, either from the administration or through GAC, especially as we start to get into the session. But even prior to that, we'll start to hear other potential pieces that are being written out there. There are a couple of these that are not on the State School Board Association resolution list right now. And when we bring these back for final action, one of GAC's recommendations are that we submit a resolution to see if we can't get support from the state association. I'm not certain we'll get that in all of those that do not have positions currently, but it certainly can't hurt us to ask.
Okay. Oh, Paul?
And I'm wondering, Jim, if it would be appropriate for the board to designate someone like yourself to meet specifically with members of the legislature to help get some of these bills drafted rather than just waiting to see what pops up. I would think that as a board we can be proactive along those lines. And I think that would be a nice change perhaps from where we've been in the past, where we just wait to see what's going to pop up, that we be proactive, and I suspect they'd probably appreciate that proactiveness. So I don't know, but I would think that perhaps our chair might designate someone to specifically do that.
Well, I think as a board, we need to finalize what our platform is and then discuss whether that is the approach that we want to take. Fair enough? Is that all right with you, Jim?
Well, it's actually GAC's intention to come back with a recommendation to either end, I guess, either make resolutions to the State School Board Association so they have to craft the legislation, and or try to identify possible bill sponsors for what we want to accomplish, with the goal of working in the fall with that group to be in a position long before the legislative session convenes to actually know how might we have success with these. Some of these already have bills being written, and others do not. So I think Paul's spot on. I think if we're going to have success, we have to do more than take a position. We actually have to have a game plan and then try to execute it. Doesn't guarantee us that we'll have success, but increases the likelihood. So that will be part of our recommendation for certain.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jim. You and GAC have done a lot of research and a lot of discussion, and I think it made it more clear and helpful for the rest of us to understand, who aren't always part of all of the discussions. And we look forward to seeing what our little numbers came up with. We will now move on to policy monitoring. We have 3 ELs, 7, 8, 9. We can take these all together. I had a motion. Jim?
I move we accept EL 7, 8, and 9 as presented in our packet.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion, everyone participated this time. There is one suggestion on EL 9 for policy change, which we will refer to governance. Are there any additional comments from anyone? Chris?
Comment on number 12, what is it, EL, hang on, scroll back to the top here, EL 9. And I just would like to reiterate that I think the administration and Dr. Schatz are doing an exceptional job of building bridges with our families that maybe aren't feeling as included.
Thank you. Anything else? In that case, all those in favor of accepting the ELs as written, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Thank you. We're now at Board reports, committee and liaison reports. Start with Chris, please.
I visited Madison, and I saw the amazing and all the terrific kids over at Madison. I happened to go, well, I planned to go on a day where they had a program, and praising all the kids for just making exceptional strides with their reading goals. And I visited with him quite a lot about their school climate and culture and some of the changes they've made, positive behavior and reinforcements. And I was just so impressed. Just a great building, great sort of vibe there, and he's just doing amazing things. It's a delight to go.
Paul?
No report.
Linda? Jim?
GAC met, as you might imagine, and we've covered all of that. Very, very important request. As you all know, come August, we're going to be having a picnic for our year-round staff, and it's never too early to start getting door prizes. If by chance your term of office is up, keep in mind, we're thanking them for this year's work while you were on the board. So Anne Marie, I know, would be happy to be the caretaker of any door prizes, gift certificates, or other things you might be able to get out there in the community. And I'm sure this will come up again at our next meeting.
Jim, I'll add it to the issues for the president's report going forward now.
Do we have a date?
Yeah, it's the first Wednesday in August. I don't have that on the list yet, but it is the first Wednesday in August. John?
Madam President, members of the board, you've heard some information relative to the Health Insurance Committee meeting. They're scheduled for Thursday, again this week to, I'm not sure if there's any knowledge coming about the projected change in rates from Blue Cross Blue Shield, but I think there were a lot of jaws dropping when we were trying to digest the concept of a 17% increase. And they're gonna, I'm sure, roll up their sleeves and look at every avenue. Their work just doesn't end. And I'm guessing that the value of the benefits consultant will really come into play with that increase on the table potentially. So it's one to keep an eye on. Sure.
Thank you. Rick?
And we also have a meeting scheduled for the 22nd, and we are just trying to refine the time, either 7:30 or 11:30. I just have to check with a few of the committee members who are basically focusing on the budget.
Okay. Everybody covered? President's report. I'll pass out to you, mostly full of reminder dates for you. I attended several things in the past weeks, but this morning I was at Agassiz for a couple of hours. I was invited by Jennifer Frey and Carrie Reggie to visit their programs, and it was fascinating to go in, because it's already been mentioned about the different levels that we offer in English language learners for adults. I went into all 5 classrooms today at all 5 levels and saw the difference between the people who have nothing to where they come. And in the top 2 classes, she introduced me and told them who I was, and I guess there's been some direction about the school district and how we operate it, and did they have any questions? And they were very articulate questions, so I was very impressed. So we're doing a really good job, and I got a really nice feeling in all of these classrooms. You know, these are people who really want to learn, who are really interested, and it just was a really nice experience. Plus, it was very nice to see again, having not had that tour since our initial restructuring of Agassiz to see how all the pieces that are in that building fit together really nicely. And everybody was commenting on the interaction of one program to another and how positive that is. The Woodrow kids working with the little kids or with the ELL parents and the interactions, the INVEST program, everything. So I think that, there were some struggles along the way, but it seems like what we've done in that building has been really positive. At least that was my impression today, so it was really fun. One thing I forgot to put on here is the next governance committee, which is Wednesday, June the 4th, rather than our usual Tuesday, but I'll make sure that's on our next, when we have another board meeting before that. And of course, governance met prior to this meeting, and you see the evidence of what we discussed as we have our board agenda. So I think that's it. I just want to point out again that if you have any requests for retreat topics, if you could get them to Anne Marie and or myself in the next couple of weeks, so that at the next governance committee, we will be narrowing down how that's going to be structured. Other reports, did anybody have it? John?
Robin was here, folks, because her birthday's before our next meeting.
Oh.
So when it comes around the 25th, you can all reach out to Robin and say happy birthday.
Sounds good. Our next meeting is May 27th, and, no, I thought you were trying to get my, stretching, just get my attention, okay? Debriefing, anyone? Rusty?
Do you have an HVAC progress update, Brock? On,
Yes.
I think
could
that
you
was
share with us?
a request for a little more information.
Members of the board, Rusty, Jim Free has been attending weekly construction meetings of these projects. There's 3 on every Monday and 3 every Tuesday. I've gone to a couple of them. A great deal of progress is moving forward. There's really been no hiccups to date. There's been a small issue that we addressed at Roosevelt, which really just had to do with better ventilation, and actually we're going to shut that project down in the pre-construction pieces until the end of school, and we had that conversation today, and it's going to not affect the outcome of that. The rest of them are progressing nicely. There's work happening in the tunnels for those buildings that have the tunnel systems. We feel like everything we've done, anything we get done prior to the end of school really advances our cause to meeting our deadline. The ONE has been very clear again today that they're very comfortable with those deadlines and feel like we're in good shape there. And there have been very minimal change order requests that have come forward with this project. There's been a couple minor ones, nothing of significance, and well within the contingency, so we're feeling like we did a good job of that planning as well. So all systems go, things are looking good, and we're moving along.
Thank you. John?
Madam President, I'm just curious, I get confused when I see ESL and ELL.
English language
I
learner
know,
and
but
English as
tonight
a
I saw
second language.
2 different reports, and I thought ESL was an acronym of the past.
The reports that I shared with you tonight came from a piece of software. That's what is programmed into that software. We can certainly work with the vendor to change it to the most accurate representation.
Something I should have mentioned earlier and forgot, especially for those watching us, thank you very much for our beautiful balloons that were gifts that we all have. I hope you'll take those home and hang them in your office or here in your office or somewhere. I know that, speaking for one board member, we appreciate all these lovely little gifts that show up on our spots from time to time. So thank you very much to the 4th grade students at Madison Elementary. Any other debriefing? Thank you very much. Have a nice long weekend, and we'll see you all on May 27th. Adjourned.